A heat chart.
Sankey chart.
Oh, Sankey chart. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's not very good loops, at least.
I don't remember if
There's one library called, like, I think it's like Network X, which is also pretty complex to use, but there you can build network maps, which could get you part of the way to what you want to do. In R, there's some quite good Markov chain libraries that will allow you to then visualize it as a looping Markov chain, which is good for visualization, but not for just analysis. It's not super actionable to interpret how people loop through. So I'm actually going to try to just remove these loops in a certain way.
What was the one that Liz or Steve presented a while ago at the Understand? Was it like the Uber visualization in like a circle?
Yeah.
Probably less helpful for this, but
I can show that later.
yeah.
Just gonna count this. Why? And so you can see, just as an example of this looping, naturally we would have quite a few, like at an aggregate, we'd have quite a few users moving from adding an item to selecting an item, and then moving from selecting item to adding an item, but it's definitely not in these numbers. So you would have to, I guess, visualize it as a Markov chain, or do add item 1, add item 2, which then really bloats it out, bloats out the visualization. So I'm actually going to then just simplify down my data set even further and take select item events, add item events, and remove item events just as editing, which I'm just going to quickly hack together. Oops. Oops. Okay. Oh shit. Oh no, okay. Yeah, so this is back on my, like, yeah, so this is back on my, like, my full data frame, but you can see now I have the edit events. And since I'm not, at this point, not going to go back to look at sessions, or like now that I've already finished that, I can actually just drop all the duplicates in here, which is a lot easier to then trim down in the way that I had done before. Where was it? There. Let's call it that.
Keep the first one for the time.
How should I do that? Oh yeah, so I'm going to go through basically by user and session. Only take out the first, or take the first time that a user did an event. But right now, and that's because now I have a much simpler group of events where it's basically you open it, dismiss it without doing anything, edit something and then dismiss it without saving, hit a save error and then, or save. So that's why I can just quickly drop all the duplicates in this way. Yeah, you can't really see it, but So now I'm going to redo my lag event because it's now different events in different orders. Oops. Oops. Oh no, now it's copying, whatever. Yeah, so now I just have my new lag event, and then I'll just group by to get the same thing that I did before with this, but now in my much simpler. Actually, I'm just going to copy that. Yeah, so now you can see the much simpler aggregation of all these events. Usually it will look like this, but there's a lot of combinations that a lot of people do. And then all of these most likely are just like tracking errors, such as people that supposedly saved this dialog screen and then dismissed it without saving it. Or saved it and then edited it somehow. Yeah, so I'm actually, oh, let me just reset things. Yeah. Actually, I'm gonna take this. Okay, so now I have just a cleaned up data frame. I know that all of these ones that are like single digit, like tracking errors are just like weird, so I'm just gonna remove them. It really depends on how good your tracking is and how accurate it is, like how you would actually go through and manually remove these, or if there's a more dynamic way that you could remove them. But for this example, I just know that it is. So I now have just these combinations of basically source and target. I can actually just pull these out. So now I just have a list of that. Same thing. Yeah, so now I have basically the three sets of lists that would be then my inputs into the Sankey. I wonder if I can just pop this down here. Keep that there. What do I want to? It's gonna be. Oh, yeah. So now I'm just pulling out all the events that are in my lag and the lag event and the normal event, just to make sure that I have a cohesive list, or a comprehensive list rather. Oops. Yeah. Oh yeah. So now I'm going to create a dictionary to do the map. Oops. Oops. Yeah, so now I just have a dictionary because the inputs into the Plotly library have to be numeric representations of the events. Yeah, so now I have numeric representations of that. Values. Get rid of oops, that one. Now it's going to get all messed up again. Yeah, you don't actually, is that right?
Square bracket.
I think I want the labels though to be the event names. Oops. I don't really want colors. Ooh. Ooh, what's going on? Yeah, so this is what then my flow, oh, I should probably fix that first. Okay, that's a kind of better. Yeah, this is what I mean, where it won't actually.
It's almost like you need to tell it to have a bigger canvas and then like allow you to drag it around.
Oh no, I can't do that. Yeah, so you can see now the aggregated visualization of that entire flow. As we saw before in like the like picking out just examples, as well as what the entire head of the data frame looked like. Most people just open and then dismiss without doing anything. That could be it. People that open it and then dismiss it with unsaved changes would then be like people don't actually add any products. They just like type something in and then somehow break it. A lot of people edit, so add select or switch products, whatever. And then a big chunk actually had save errors. And that it's kind of hard to see, but if somebody hits a save error, you can see the vast majority of them can't actually help themselves. They just end up abandoning the entire flow. So there's some pretty clear product suggestions for this fake product of how to get people to actually even use it, or to better target the availability of the product to people that would be more likely to use it, as well as diving deeper into what actually is causing people to hit these save errors.
Why doesn't show the attribution at every step to the final step?
Sorry?
It shows numbers 1, 2.
Oh, those are the number of flows going into the count. The top part, the 7.03K. That's the total. You could also change these into percentages as well when you're at this step. Like the value can be anything, but the great part of first going through and figuring out how to simplify it, from the point that I simplified it, there's actually only 3 steps. So you could just functionize this entire thing to be like, okay, give me a cleaned up stream of events, and then just automatically output all of the arrays that are lists that need to go into this function. But the really awesome part about Plotly is if something breaks, it tells you nothing. It just shows you like a white screen, and you have to like figure out what exactly, like, it'll tell you if like something's specifically coded wrong, but if there's like a loop or some values that don't actually make coherent sense for the graph, it'll just not display. Which almost always means that you have a loop in there somewhere.
So it's all possible sequences, yeah? It's all possible sequences presented here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Except for the loop. Well, it's actually, this is, given how I simplified it, this is all possible sequences.
Because the loop would give us a good information that there's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could then pull out, you'd have to like go back and then do that kind of like bespoke or like unique to it to get a better, to get like a better handle of this type of view of where people, like, it's kind of like a sink, like a kitchen sink, like where people are just like looping continuously and falling off. And then, but I would know that it's either like the selecting, the removing. Well, you can't really remove continuously. But people are like just adding continuously. Yeah, but
We can see the problem within sessions. We can aggregate sessions count and show the loop. The loop count
so this is aggregated. This is aggregated sessions.
by sessions, but not by
Oh.
users. So
Yeah,
it's
you
not
could
really
change.
user-
You could change. Yeah, it would basically. It would just be a longer session, then. But then you would run into more loops. Yes, that's. But you could. The best visualization for that would most likely be a Markov chain visualization in R. There's also. I'm basically giving this as an example because I know it exists. Oh, there we go. This is another cool view from Uber on their public engineering blog. Is it okay?
That's fine. The data's dragged down.
And what the all possible steps are? More than 12?
Oh, then your Sankey would be like really ugly and not really usable. But it depends on if you're like doing this for exploration or if you're doing this to like convince somebody to change a product or do something. And I would actually argue that there's very few times that you would actually need to have 12 steps in your funnel displayed to show to someone in order to get them to change it. Or you could show it and be like, look how complex this is, which is then a different thing. But there's very few arguments I would say that actually need that complex of a user journey to be presented to a product person. But for exploration, it would definitely probably make sense to then add in that like add item 1, add item 2. But then you run into a lot more problems with looping. Yeah, so going to this Uber example. Why is it cut off? So their use case with this was driver registrations for Uber, where like a Sankey, and I would agree with him, like a Sankey diagram or just a funnel diagram would assume that your funnel looks like this, where everyone kind of marches through the same set of events, but in reality, like signing up to be a driver on Uber happens like in loops at different starting points, at different like midpoints. And like all of these views, one of the annoying things that you can't really get to are these like if-then scenarios. So like it answers this one, like how many drivers went through event A, but none of the views that I've really shown are like if A then B, and then more importantly, like if A then B and then D. And so what they had come up with is this kind of bizarre sunburst visualization, which at first I also thought was a bit like nobody would use this, or it's like it's very complex. But you basically just like go up through the events, then it tells you what percentage it is. You could actually build this, like, okay, not easily. You can build this in Plotly, I think, as well, where you would calculate off of a step ID. Like each of those rings is another step ID. And then it would just be the percentage of people that have step 2 as add items, whatever. And then you could build that out as well.
Within the same session.
Within the same session or across, that would be really ugly across an entire user lifetime. Yeah, so there's this view that they've built, and then, okay, that's just silly. Yeah.
Or put your data into sequence mining too.
Or you could,
Sure.
yes, you could also do that. Yeah, that's then more complex. Oh, here's and so the view that I was talking about with the loops, this is something also in their tool of a Markov chain visualization, which, yeah. So you can see the loops, and it gives you the probability of moving from one state to another state, which is also quite good. The way that you would not get to the visualization, but the inputs, the way you would get to the percentages would you would also build a count of how many people go from lag event to event. So build out those combinations, but then you would divide it by all of the people that went to that lag event. So of everyone that was on add item, this percentage of them then moved to this new state, and that's how you would get the probabilities through there. And then you would most likely need to use a Markov chain or in like a network visualization package to get the actual visualization. It's just outside of very specific questions, it's actually relatively difficult to interpret what you would use this for. Because like if you have a 25% probability of looping and like selecting items, like you don't, like where does that end? Like what do you do with that like information? It's a bit difficult. Yeah. So that's the end of my workshop. Oh, okay, it's 20 minutes early. You get an extra break. Unless you have other questions or would like to try something as well.
Just one question, a bit, it's not really in the scope of this, but a bit ahead. I think how you do, so you have all your data sets of event, how you get it, how you collect it, I mean generally, data.
So web is relatively straightforward. Just
I mean, you are going directly in the server logs.
Yeah.
Or you have something sending the data, like event sending the data in some database, or
So
you are
mobile,
creating the data for
like
the data set.
most. So this one is.
This is a web, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, this is fake data off of like web
Yeah.
web data. So that would just be server log data, within mapping of codes to get the event names. Mobile would be like the actual tracking links, or not links, tracking calls sent out by the app, and I purposely like only started with this minimal amount of data. Well, I didn't really use the country for anything, so that's fine, because that would be IP mapping. But just with those 3 columns, like you would most likely, any way that you're tracking across web or mobile, you would most likely have that exact data. Yeah, you'd at this point, because of GDPR, you would have to build your own user IDs, I believe. Can we still collect IDFAs? Does anyone know that? Anyway, you would have your most likely like the device ID or something, unless you're in privacy breach. I don't know. But yeah, you'd basically get this just out of standard tracking calls, like mobile tracking calls, or server logs.
Yeah, and you're storing what kind of system?
What's that?
What kind of system are you storing all this data?
Hive.
Hive.
So there's a thing we use called Scribe, which has also been open sourced, and Scribe is essentially the tool we use to stream log events
Oh, shit.
from a bunch of different things to into Hive, and you can get Scribe to talk to a bunch of different backend databases.
Was it this one?
So one question.
No, I guess if you it's on GitHub. If you search for, I think I searched for Facebook devlogger Scribe.
Oh, here. Yeah.
And I think this includes some logger stuff as well. So
Okay.
you can essentially integrate it with. I don't know if this exact example on GitHub has a kind of mobile app SDK, but through some combination of like Scribe and Logger, you can just dump data into
Also-
Hive streaming format.
Was it Kafka is also for streaming log events? Was that Kafka?
Yes, it's broker, I mean like messaging broker. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I wanted to know if you're like sending this event, I mean like you get the log, Kafka is after.
You don't use
message
Kafka.
broker and sending
We
to-
don't use
You use-
We use Logger and then Scribe.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you want to talk more about?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I can give any more detail. Just in terms, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
It's more of an Eng thing.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
more
on,
data engineering.
on web it's pretty easy. On mobile, obviously a lot of what happens on mobile will end up calling web APIs anyway. So then server side you can do the logging. I think we do some logging on client side, which then gets kind of bundled up and sent off to the server. But I honestly don't know. And then Scribe manages how all that's streamed into Hive.
And then with most like mobile logging, you either have like in terms of event times, you either have like the client time or the server time, both of which have different set of problems. Like your server, most likely your events will be like batched, and then so the server time won't actually be even the correct order of things necessarily, whereas the client side will be whatever time the user has their phone set to.
Yeah, we have to adjust the time zones and all that sort of fun stuff.
When it depends what industry you're working in. So I used to previously work in mobile gaming, and we would want to use the client time quite often because it was a bit more accurate. But within like free to play mobile gaming, there's a huge incentive to go and change what time your phone is in order to like unlock 2-hour gates or something, like rather than waiting. And so at this very first step, you would need to do a lot of exploratory analysis on just what your event times look like. Like you might have some in like the 70s and you might have some in like 2020, or people that just like time travel a lot. Yeah, so I would,
That must be really annoying from an analysis perspective.
it's super annoying. But those are also,
But some time zone who is not existing, I don't even understand from where there is a lot of time zone that doesn't, it's not a standard time zone.
that can also happen. But in most cases, at least in this specific case with mobile gaming, you can just throw away all the time travelers, because like none of the cheaters are actually going to use the game in the way that you. Like you would never design for cheaters, so you should just get rid of them. I think that's a. You can use that across all aspects of life. No, but yeah, you would just remove them as outliers. So, any other questions?
So for every new feature, you define the main metrics and measurements that must be analyzed, or you have standard packages. For example, new feature has released, and there are some measurements, or you have to make some packages to analyze all that feature. Because in this case, I see that you scripted for that case, for situation.
Yeah, I mean, you should always have it standard. Chances are it never will be. But yeah, it depends on how you would define your events. Well, it depends what your product is. It would depend on how you define your events, like which one is specifically getting logged. But you could automate away at most of this. So even here, I can functionize 75% of this, probably.
So every problem is unique.
Yeah. And
I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. In that, like
Yeah.
for any new product, it'll obviously have a unique set of behaviours and a unique set of events. And so, doing a kind of bespoke analysis like this is really helpful because it means you can understand exactly what's going on with that thing. There are, to your question around like for every experiment you run, like do you have to do this from scratch? No. So like there are standard metrics which we're always interested in. And so when you run an A/B test with a new product, like you don't need the event level detail of what's going on with that product in order to understand whether it's a good or a bad thing ultimately for what you're trying to achieve. So then all you have to do is you just have kind of standard logging, and you can combine the metrics which you're interested in with the kind of the people exposed in that experiment and say, at a high level, is this hurting or helping the metrics that we're interested in?
yeah, and from here,
So also impact on global health metrics. Yeah?
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, that
You
would.
normally have a few subsets. You'll have your global health metrics. You're probably going to have your more tactical, like team interest metrics. So, like if what you're trying to achieve with this. So, in this example, we're talking about multiple products selling on marketplace. So, if you were trying to say, like, well, we think that net this should be good for the number of products people are listing. It should be good for the number of people who are using marketplace every day. Those metrics are going to be very easy to kind of run against your A/B test. You don't need to go down to this level of detail for that.
Yeah, and then like from this like custom analysis and like the product recommendations that would come out of this, I would build very simple metrics on top of that for actual reporting. So like percentage of this over this, and just check that, because I would know specifically that save errors are a problem, and I want to decrease that as much as possible. So I just distill that into like the most basic division possible, and then track that.
That makes sense.
As well as then like this percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. How many people going in and using it? How many people hitting problems? That's
Yeah.
easy to kind of.
And how many people are just like kind of window shopping. Yeah.
So do you use any visualization tools, for example, Tableau or Looker?
We built everything, which is good and annoying.
Yeah.
All these questions could be also answered by Facebook Analytics tool. No?
Facebook Analytics tool.
Not well. It depends. So Facebook Analytics is useful, but obviously, like it has some limitations. So if you gave it the data in the format it expected it in a kind of neat way, then it would probably help you answer some of this stuff. But there's a lot of stuff you can't do with it.
Yeah. You would most likely just get the ratios of events. You wouldn't really get like the order of events of what people are doing. Google Analytics will give you this as a like a churn chart.
I think you can get funnels out of Facebook Analytics. But it's been a while since I played with it.
I haven't looked at that.
What language you use for exploratory analysis?
That very much depends on the data scientist and what they're comfortable in. So everything really starts with SQL, because all of the data warehouse is Hive-based, and then we have Presto sitting on top of that to make it quick and easy to query data. So you will get a data set of some form using SQL, and then some people do a lot of analysis in SQL and then just either go straight to Excel or Tableau to like visualize a kind of cube at the last minute. Some people use Python, some people use R. I personally prefer R to Python. But actually a lot of what I do, I find I can do using a combination of SQL and some of our own internal charting tools. It all depends.
I think, there's quite a few people that like just stay in SQL for like base analysis, but that's most likely because of our internal tools. I guess if you had like Periscope data or another SQL-based dashboarding, you could also kind of stay within that. But me personally, which benefit like positives and negatives, I just dump everything into a notebook and then start going from there.
Do you use sample data?
Yeah, I would sample. and then run through it. Usually hit quite a few dead ends, branch off, start going somewhere else, and then once I actually figure out what road I'm trying to drive down, that's when I would run it for everything. Otherwise, the whole thing will explode.
So why not to use Spark?
Spark for that?
Well, you couldn't do this sort of analysis in
No.
Spark. So what do you mean? What would you use Spark for?
For using, for example, using Scala to explore data,
Oh.
because to deal with population, not with sample data, for understanding what's happening.
Okay,
If you know the distribution of data.
I guess it depends what you want to do. So we have Spark for like really big crunching, but actually Presto is much faster and will run most queries that you want to run in Spark anyway. And then, but you'll never most of the time we wouldn't go throwing raw data from Hive into a notebook because it's just going to be far too big. So you use the SQL to do some sort of, we will use Presto or Spark to do some sort of pre-aggregation, and then you'll use that aggregated data then in your notebook to kind of draw the conclusions.
Aggregated or just sampled to start. Then if you're doing any, I was gonna say if you're doing any like predictive modeling, it would most likely be more raw, but that's not necessarily the case.
No, you still, like, most stuff gets at least partially aggregated before you put it into a notebook.
Oh, how much time do I have? There's also, yep. Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
So as you just said, we can have like metrics that we should analyze for each tool feature that we're doing for release.
Yep.
But is there some logic or approach that we can select some subcohort of users from that feature to analyze that feature deeper, to analyze frictions inside the funnel of that like micro-session, yeah? So as we see, we have like drop from open event, for example, 60%. So we don't to track users that are doing one event per month. So is there some approach that you select some sub-cohort of users of the feature to analyze that feature deeper and to like understand what's going inside?
I guess that's kind of what we've been doing here. So like earlier on when Timothy dropped a bunch of the sessions where people were just opening and then closing before plotting the fast.
That was different.
That was kind of saying, I'm only interested in people who have like actually used this as opposed to opened it and then closed it. Or are you, when you're talking about cohorts, do you mean like identify people who are using it and then track them over time?
Like users who did this action like 10 times per day for past 10 days. Or some kind of activity level that users should pass that level to be included in that analysis.
Oh. Yeah, you could do that. Like you would basically be pulling out like the heavy users of your product in that case. Yeah, you could definitely do that. You could either do that based off a heuristic rule of like 10 times per day fall into group or not. But you can also, if you know that you want groups based off of how frequent they use it, you could also run a clustering algorithm on top of it and let that decide what groups rather than kind of arbitrarily. You'd probably end up with the same results of your analysis by doing both of those, but clustering could be a bit more fun. Yeah. But if you want to start cluster or grouping based off of multiple dimensions, maybe like frequency of use and how much they've spent, then it could be a better idea to do simple clustering on it, and then pull out the different clusters and explain their behavior, like that. That could be. I just wanted to call out another package that's pretty cool for events or event data. It's an R package from Google, but I think that there's a Python version. I'm pretty sure. It's really easy to use. It basically it basically lets you kind of fake an A/B test. Like if you can't actually set up an A and B group for your test, but you know that only certain people were actually exposed to it. Like if you roll out a new feature only in Germany and nowhere else, you know that that's kind of A/B test, but not really. And so you have like two time series which are unequal, so it's not necessarily an A/B test. This package allows you to just dump in your data, define what period is before the intervention or the release of the feature, and then the post, and then it plots out a really cool summary of like what the impact of that feature is without doing like statistical testing or like proper A/B testing. So it's a really cool library, and then it gives you what your original time series are, the pinpoint increase, as well as then like the cumulative effect of that increase over your post period. So it's also worth checking out. So.
But only if we set A/B tests for that feature, yes?
So if you can't for whatever reason, or something happened in the past that you want to look at in a certain way, you can use this. You should always try to A/B test properly, but it doesn't like you're not. There are quite a few cases where you just can't for whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thanks all.